Hi, Dr. Rob. You have a different
Hey,
background
Tammy.
today.
Yes, I'm working at the office today with our clients. Did I tell you something? I have to tell you something that we just got statistics on our podcast. And did you know that the ones that we are doing together far exceed the other ones on my recently?
Oh,
So we
wow.
have to let more people know about our podcast.
I am shocked, but pleased. I do hear consistently from people that are finding these on YouTube, are finding our podcast, your podcast, all of the resources. That's really meaningful. I mean, they're so grateful. For those of you joining, I'm glad you're here on the webinar live and asking questions. But if you're watching this on YouTube, please know that you can join us on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. You'll see the webinars, drop-in groups, podcasts, blogs, all kinds of resources for you. Whether you're an addict or someone who loves an addict, we've got lots of resources for you. So we've got lots of questions already. First one, hi, woman, sex, and love addict. I shared last week that I've been seeing a guy for 4 months, no sex and just building friendship. I was brave and brought up that I'd like to have some clarity whether this is exclusive and the lack of physical is becoming challenging. He said, we're just friends and he cannot give me any timeline or benchmarks. I'm beginning to see that he is avoidant. However, he continues to act towards me like we are in a relationship. Roses, gifts, calls me sweetie. I'm really feeling lost in this. While he won't move forward, he also wants a lot of time, attention, etc. Any help would be appreciated. Thoughts?
Well, Tammy, I'd like to lean into you as a woman who probably was out there dating at one point and see what comes up for you in this question. I know it was in the last century, probably
Yes, it
was,
was.
but nonetheless, please go ahead. What do you think about
Well,
this?
yeah, I mean, I feel like, yeah, like to me, I was like, oh, he's not in it for the same reasons you are. In the very basic level, I'm like, you have goals of like pursuing a relationship, whether it's with him or someone else, and he's giving you mixed messages clearly mixed messages about like I want to just be friends. Yeah, exactly, the push me pull ya. Yeah, that was a good analogy in sign language. That calls me sweetie, gives me roses, all of that would be very confusing. So I can totally understand why you feel lost, because on the one hand he's calling me sweetie and he's giving me roses and that feels like a romantic gesture, but on the other hand we're just friends. So to me, that would be problematic. And for myself, I'd have to set my boundaries of like, well, this doesn't appear to be going in the same direction. If we want to maintain friendships, then I might have to set my friendship at, this is what I expect from a friend. And we're going to see each other less because I'm going to go look for, a romantic relationship. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, I tend to be a little more direct, so I would say run as fast as you can. Because first of all, if you're in recovery, this is very confusing. It's hard enough for us to figure out how to have a relationship, how to pursue a relationship. And you're doing all the right stuff because I've heard you, reach out before, but this person isn't willing to play. And, it takes two to tango. And you have every right, and I think addicts struggle with this, to make sure your needs are met in relationships, whether that's a friendship or or a romantic partnership. And if your needs aren't being met and you've asked about it and the person isn't really responding in the way that you want them to, then you need to move on. And by the way, I want to say something about love addiction, and most of the folks, well, actually, I'll say something about dating in general. Tammy, I never told you this, but a bunch of therapists, years and years ago, a bunch of us therapists went to a dating workshop so that we could work with our clients around dating, which, everyone in that workshop were single therapists who are really going for themselves. And one of the things that they said in that workshop was that dating is a numbers game. And it may well be you have to date 16 to 20 people in a year to figure out if the right person is out there for you. And unfortunately, I think most people give up too soon, or they settle on someone that isn't quite right, but they're so needful that they go for it anyway. And then they regret it. You're in recovery. You're seeing signs in a healthy way that this doesn't work for you. Follow your gut. Oh, she just, I think, wrote a real quick thing across here that said, how do I kindly, or what in a compassionate way do you let him down? Was that, I think?
No, that I think that's another whole question, and so I just asked to have that
Okay.
one put in the. So for those of you joining, thank you. But if you put your questions in the Q&A, then it helps me track them it a lot better and follow. What the other thing I want to applaud the first question because we suggested have the conversation, and look what happened. She had the conversation, and so give you lots of kudos because I'm sure that had to be like one of those, oh, it's kind of scary to do this, but you did, and you're taking care of you, and that's progress. And like Dr. Rob said, it's a numbers game. So, okay, next question. I have a trauma bond with my SA husband. He is a mother enmeshment. So does this mean he is trauma bonded with her and not with me? Then if I had emotional abuse trauma from my mom in childhood, am I repeating this now? That's a complicated question.
That's
So
several
first,
questions.
yes. So the first piece is stated I have a trauma bond with my SA husband. He's a mother enmeshment. So does this mean he is trauma bonded with her and not with me?
So I wrote a book called Prodependence. And in it, in the last chapter, I talked about how those of us with issues tend to attract those of us with issues. And it's just, we kind of float with the people we float with. And if you're an emotional 3, you're going to find emotional 3s and all of that. So I'm not sure I believe in a trauma bond in the sense that I think challenged people are going to find each other. And I don't think that bond is necessarily just around trauma. I bet there's love and connection and family and all kinds of things. So, but you may be repeating things that came up for the two of you in growing up that you haven't worked through. And one of my rules about being in relationship is that the person I'm in relationship with is always accountable for themselves. They're going to therapy, they're working on themselves. Kind of like the guy that this person was dating, he didn't really seem like he could own his stuff. And this is Rob's rule for, relationships. If the person can't own their stuff, then you're always the person who's bad. You're always the one who's wrong. We are friends with a man by the name of Ken Adams, Dr. Ken Adams, and he's written a lot about this. And I wonder, Tammy, since you spend so much time with Dr. Adams listening to him lecture and you guys are friends, what thoughts? Oh, by the way, he does workshops, right? So do you have some things you might want to recommend or put in the chat for these folks?
Sure. So you said he's a mother enmeshment. So I don't know if he owns that. Dr. Adams did write Silently Seduced and When He's Married to Mom, and I will put this in the chat in a few minutes. And he also does intensives for men that are mother enmeshment. Now, often the mother enmeshment are sex addicts as well, because it's very easy to understand that if you're really bonded with your mother in an unhealthy way, then being bonded with a spouse or partner is problematic because that's a betrayal to this bond with
And it's
mom.
scary.
And
And
it's
it's
scary.
scary.
Yeah. So having indiscriminate sex is easier because it's detached and it's body parts and it's whatever, but it's not meaningful. So my suggestion is to look into the information. Dr. Adams also did a Super Saturday Recovery Summit, so I'll put the link to the videos in there as well. I think you would find that information useful as well.
We also, I think I did a podcast on sex, love, and addiction with Dr. Ken Adams, and we talk about maternal enmeshment in there.
Yes.
Look, I have a lot of enmeshment issues. I have to work on a day-to-day basis to set boundaries and be really clear about my needs and my partner's needs. But this is a life journey. If I love someone, I'm connected to them, I want it to work. If they want it to work, then we have work to do. And unfortunately, a lot of us kind of ride on our intellect and our good experiences and don't take enough time to look at ourselves. Everybody in this room has issues. Everybody has issues, but in this room in particular. And if we don't work on them, they bring us down. So
yeah. And the last part of it is, if I had emotional abuse trauma when from my mom in childhood, and am I repeating that?
I don't think it's so much repeating. It's more not seeing signs of things that other people would say, ooh, that doesn't make me feel comfortable. I don't like that. But if you grow up with certain patterns of behavior, then if you're in a relationship with someone as an adult who does all this other stuff like that, you're just going to not see it. Whereas somebody else might say, oh, I don't like that, or please, we miss it because it's what we grew up with. So
well,
I'm ready.
Well, but
Sorry,
I was
go ahead.
thinking also there's opportunities to work on that trauma from earlier. I mean, a good EMDR therapist or somatic experience or something like that can help you work on that foundational trauma, so that you aren't getting the layered trauma with your SA husband now too. So, okay, next question. I know I have I know I have attached with my SA partner as I feel strong connection to him. Do SAs attach to their partners as well, or do they just attach to their addiction and acting out? Just wondering why I continue to feel close with him, but he seems so distant. So I'm
Well,
assuming, I'm assuming
yeah,
this is an active addiction. I don't hear my recovering SA partner. So
I,
what do you
I,
think?
I I think there is a way of thinking about this that I've seen in a lot of addicts, which is if you've spent time together, if you've had some meaningful experiences, if you've connected, in the past or recently. The thing about us addicts is we tend to be very connected to our partners. We just don't like to acknowledge it to ourselves or them. So we go out and we do our own thing and I'm fine and they won't know or they won't, we dismiss partners and we go out. But I'll tell you what, let any partner of ours move just an inch away. Like, I'm not happy with you. And boy, do we wake up and realize how connected we really are to them. It's just, well, for me, I grew up, this is going to sound kind of strange, but not having to not know how attached I was to my mom. My mom was so ill and I needed to be really close to her, but she was so crazy. And I think a part of me always said, kept a distance inside of me. And was, we're talking about trauma earlier, trauma work, trauma this, trauma that. It doesn't take much. You don't have to go much further than look at your life today, your relationships, your intimacies. You can see your trauma, whatever that is, in it. I just met with, we run a treatment center called Seeking Integrity, which is where I am. And I just met with the guys, and I said to them, you all have trauma. I mean, whether you're aware of it or not, healthy people don't end up not trusting the people they love, lying to the people they love, running away from home and doing this. This isn't healthy. And you learn to escape and tolerate whatever it is you're tolerating by doing this a long time ago. So I think trauma shows up in our adult lives. And by the way, if an addict works on their behavior, they eventually start looking back at the trauma. There's room to, if you're an active addict, there's no room for that. Active addicts can't take on meaningful psychotherapy. This is why. Because active addicts are most invested in escaping their feelings and getting away from things that are uncomfortable. And therapy is designed to make you look at things and maybe make you a little uncomfortable. So when people start working in therapy, if they keep running to their addiction, they don't gain any traction in looking at trauma or regular therapy. So if you're speaking about your spouse and they're still acting out, there's no opportunity for them to heal in a larger way. People, by the way, can get insight in therapy. They can learn things up here, but really working through means sobriety.
Well said. Okay, next question. What kind of interaction is expected for a partner to have with an SA sponsor, if any?
I don't think it's my role as a partner to have any relationship with my husband or wife's sponsor. I think that's it kind of like a therapist, that's their person, that's who they rely on. And I'll tell you what you do have a right to is to see their recovery plan. You can, whether it's a circle, however they define their sobriety. I've had men say, oh, I don't want to show that to my wife. That's my recovery. Or they tell me not to share things. We're not really supposed to talk about other people or other relationships because we want to remain anonymous. But certainly, there's room to look at the things you're afraid of or you're worried about and see if they're on his list. If I were just your average person in recovery, I'd probably list porn, sex workers, affairs, all the stuff that would be my bottom line. You have to understand in Alcoholics Anonymous and when you're dealing with drug addiction, those people just stop and that's it for life. They don't use those things, those substances again, unless they fall off the wagon. But we still want to be sexual. We still want to eat. Those of us who have naturally occurring functions that have run off the rails. So anyway, I think I'm losing my track. Tim, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that that's an appropriate answer. If it was a therapist having, and Dr. Rob has talked about this, having a conjoint session occasionally to get the collateral information is good. But with a sponsor, Yeah, I mean, that's another person in recovery, so it's a very different situation. So,
Confidential, anonymous.
mhm. Next question, 14 months, 8 months since disclosure, husband has joined SPAA. That must be Sex and Porn Addicts Anonymous.
Maybe it's something
I'm gonna
new.
look it up. I'm writing it down. In May, 12-step class, has sponsor stopped seeing his CSAT. Told him part of my boundaries is to continue. He says he doesn't feel like he's getting much from the CSAT. What can I suggest to CSAT to help him? Is it okay to stop CSAT? What are your thoughts? Appreciate all you guys do. So very helpful. So,
Well, let me just first say a CSAT is a certified sex addiction therapist. They've been through certain training. There's other kinds of trainings, but that's the big one. And so a CSAT means someone has a master's, they're licensed or above, they're a psychologist, and they also haven't had about really basically a year of training in how to do this work. So not everyone sees professionals who understand this work, and not everyone sees a professional who understands addiction. And so we're trained, those of us who have this certification, both in human sexuality and in also looking at addictions. So I just wanted to explain the CSAT part. And what's the next question in there?
um, he
Oh,
apparently said,
right.
I want to stop. He's not getting much out of it. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, I always, and Tammy will back me up on this, I'm always worried about when my spouse comes to me and says, this is what's happening in my therapy, because I don't know what's happening in their therapy. Or even worse, my wife's therapist said, or my husband's therapist said. It's like, we lie, we manipulate. This may well be a way for him to say, I don't really want to go to this therapist. I don't really want to look at my issues. This therapist might be really pushing him and making him work, and he just wants to get out of there and tells you, I'm not really getting anywhere. Addicts lie. So in this situation, Tammy, what she said earlier, you can have a conjoint session with somebody's therapist and say, these are my concerns in our relationship, and I wonder if they're being dealt with in therapy. Or even, you don't have to tell me if they're being dealt with, but these are the things I'm going through, and I want to make sure you're aware of them. Because addicts can shade the truth in a whole bunch of ways and make themselves look good in their situations, even though they're doing things that you wouldn't like.
Well, and my thought was, he's going to the 12-step, great. But I'm going, is he going once a week? Is he talking to a sponsor once a week? Like, that is not sufficient enough to get to the stuff that Dr. Rob was talking about earlier, those underlying issues. And so 14 months, I mean, it's really easy. I've seen so many people get to 6 months or whatever and get very complacent, and going like, oh, it's good enough. I think it's also like Dr. Rob was talking about, they get to that place where now it's uncomfortable. And so, oh, I don't like, I've got it good enough. I've taken the heat off. And so I'm just going to stop here. And what happens is they don't stop here. They backslide, and then they relapse, and then it's problematic, and it's the whole cycle all over again.
By the way, some therapists aren't very good. And
Correct.
some therapists really don't push people and aren't making progress. And there are some people who are certified in this work who still don't really know how to do it. So, there is the very good possibility that your husband is raped and he's not really making in progress, which just means I would hope that he finds another CSAT to work with or another trained person, because he might well be telling you the truth. We just don't know.
Yes, there's a lot of CSATs that I refer to consistently, and there's a lot that I never will. So that's, just because they have the letters doesn't make them a great therapist. So,
And let me just say that about Tammy, Tami, four-letter word, at seekingintegrity.com. We often, Tammy and I both, Rob at Seeking Integrity, Tammy at Seeking Integrity, get notes from folks that say, where do I find a therapist? Or where do I find a treatment program? Or where can I take a class? Or, we are always available to give you that information. It's one of the things that we do. To be honest, we run a treatment center, and if 9 of you get information to heal your recovery, and one of you says, oh, I'd like to join you for treatment, that makes everything we give away free easy to do. So
yes.
we're always willing to give you referrals, and we don't get kickbacks. But Tammy worked for the CSAT organization for what, 10, 15, 10, a
10,
bunch of
10
years.
and a half years. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so she
So,
knows almost everybody in the country who's been trained in this way. And like she said,
and
some
outside the
people,
country.
and outside the country. And some of these people, I love them dearly, but I wouldn't refer my worst enemy. And some of these people are just amazing. And I think they were amazing before they did the CSAT, and they're
Yes.
even more amazing now.
Yes.
Go ahead,
I
Tam.
always said a good therapist can gain more skills. A bad therapist, it doesn't matter what kind of training they have, they're still, it's like anything else. But I also believe, that it's like you were talking about, it can be really easy to have it be, oh, that person's pushing me. So understanding what the real issue is, would be helpful. And having that session together could be useful information. So next question. Hi, wife of a recovering sex addict. As he was doing work with his therapist, the subject of sexual anorexia was covered. Not an issue for him, but when we discussed, we realized that I probably am sexually anorexic. Brand new to the idea and wondering what resources you can suggest.
Well, again, I keep running into these terms. The term sexual anorexia does not really exist. Anorexia is applied to eating disorders, but what you're talking about is avoidance of sexuality or hyposexuality. If sex addicts are hypersexual, people who avoid sex are hyposexual. So if addiction is not really the issue, and if this is something you're beginning to uncover for yourself, you know, therapy is the best place for this. Again, there are some sex therapists who are extraordinary and really know their work and could help you explore. And in fact, if you're interested in finding a sex therapist, I think I could do some research for you because I have a PhD. I hate saying this. I have a PhD in sex. So, I know a lot of
You
sex
worked
therapists.
hard for it, and I mean that in a very legitimate way. So
I know, but I also worked really hard for it in the past.
there you
I
do.
know a
That's
lot
true.
about sex. In any case, I'm glad to make referrals and glad to ask questions for. I think the problem with therapists in general is they're not very well trained in human sexuality. And so they don't understand what a fetish is. They don't understand what sexual avoidance, they're used to dealing with counseling issues or family issues or a depression but most therapists truly are not trained in sex. So finding someone who can really deal with the sexual fears, hyposexuality, while also looking at emotional issues, it takes the right professional.
Well, and so two things. One is you just did a podcast that I think should launch this week with Bill and Ginger Burkaw, who do the sexual
Oh,
reintegration. Isn't it good that you have me here? The sexual reintegration. And the other thing I was thinking of is many partners are shut down because it's not safe. And so, it gets pathologized on you. And I'm not saying, I mean, you may have had, something and it really may be an issue for you. But the other thing is that, sex may have not been safe and you even in your gut and body knew that. And so you shut down and now it's being perceived that you are. So it could be possibly that as you have trust and there's a space to rebuild trust and intimacy, that doing some sexual reintegration might be, a useful thing to you. So again, that podcast should launch on sex, love, and addiction, I think this week. Bill and Ginger Burkaw were with Dr. Rob. So
I want to say just build on what you said for a moment, Tammy. Did she say 8 months in that email? Because I wrote down
um,
8 months.
that was, I think, the last one. This one didn't have a timeline.
Oh, okay.
That was the
Because I
previous one.
wonder, kind of building on what Tammy said, if it's been 4 months or 6 months or 8 months since you found out about this, it's way too soon for you to expect yourself to want to feel sexual. And by the way, I hate to say this, but addicts, we blame our partners. And to say to you, you're not sexual enough, you don't want to have sex as much as I, blah, 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 is kind of a way of it feeling entitled to go do what I want. Oh, well, she doesn't enjoy sex. She wants sex with, so I'll go over here and do it. So I would really want to look within myself and see my sexual history. Have I enjoyed masturbation? Have I enjoyed sex with other people? And what is there something going on in this situation? Because you said he pointed it out. I don't know. That worries me a little bit. So
Well, and to add on to what you're saying, it shifts the focus because it's like, okay, he's a
right.
sex addict, but now it shifts the focus. Oh, you might have a issue, and then it's like, oh, I'm over here going like, yeah, it's all about, it's not me. So that was my thought. Okay. Next question. Hi, after 36 years of marriage and he has gaslighted me for 4 years, I separated from him. We've been apart for 10 months. I don't think he's disclosed everything. I have two questions. Number one, would his disclosure help me heal, even if we're separated or already? What do you think? And I'll read you the second one too. He sometimes asks me to translate your webinars to him since he's hearing impaired and not so good in English, and I am. I have never done that, and I'm afraid he'll just find excuses to talk to me. What do you think? So the first question is, they've been separated.
I got it.
Okay, and would a
I'm
disclosure?
taking notes.
Okay, thank you.
So, the purpose of disclosure, the reason we do it, as painful and as uncomfortable it is in the service of a couple building intimacy and growing together, that two people who've already committed that they're going to stay together, they're going to work on this, and they're going to try and see it through. And what we often do is say, look, this disclosure may be horrible, it may be difficult, but we're going to ask you to put your relationship on hold for 6 months or a year and say, we're going to work through this, and then see if we want to stay together at the end of it. But I don't think if you're not there, so if you're not there and it isn't really your intention to go back, I don't, as much as spouses want disclosure to understand what they've been through, it's really not yours to have. It is something that involves two people who are willing to go through some painful times to come back together. And I think there's sort of an obvious answer in here, which is if you sit down with your spouse and he tells you all these horrible things that he did, I doubt it's going to make you feel much closer or want to build the relationship. So, and also 36 years, 10 months apart, that's really profound. Tammy knows that when we're working with couples, 90% of them stay together despite all this pain. And the ones that most often stay together are the ones who live together a very long time, because you've been through so much together and there's so much water under the bridge that you don't want this to be the reason you break up. It's usually younger couples that we see break up because, the partner says, well, look what I'm in for. I don't want to be in for this forever. I don't want to have kids with this. And so they move on. I will say it's unusual for a couple after 36 years to do what you're doing. And I have to say, I admire you because it's very painful. And I wanted to, I guess, say this to you too. I run into a lot of women in particular. I do this in the rooms thing on Friday nights. I'm on In the Rooms. I do the same thing every week on intherooms.com. And I often get the question of, from a woman, he treated me badly and this was bad and that was bad. And I hated this. And how come I still miss him? Why do I still so wanting to see him when he's done all these awful things? And here's the thing, just because someone's hurt you and let you down or ruined your life, and a part of you says, screw them, it doesn't mean that there isn't a whole other party that's still deeply attached. And, I wonder about your grieving. I wonder about your letting, you're looking to the history and saying, can I get something out of this? And I'm thinking, why did you leave? Has anything changed? What's different in him? You said he hasn't been honest with me. I wouldn't be moving back in anytime soon. So as I said earlier, one of the few motivations that addicts have for change is the fear of losing someone important to them. And if he isn't coming around because you moved out after, or when he moved out after 36 years, I can't imagine what's going to motivate him. To answer both of them?
Well, the
Translate.
second one,
Oh, I got it.
yeah, translate. I'm
I
like,
got it.
there's Google
No.
programs. No, yeah,
No.
don't do it. There's Google
Right.
programs on your computer. It will do it all for you. Yeah, you don't need to do
you
that.
can do Google. And if nothing else, you can ask your spouse to find someone else to do this for you. And I don't know that he's doing it to keep you connected, but it's just a little too convenient to have you just there to help him out. I think part of our journey as addicts is to find other people to, especially men, if you're a man, to reach out to get support and not keep going to my spouse and saying, will you do this for me? And will you do that for me when you're the one who's been hurt?
There's technology that will assist him, so he can find that. So, okay, next question. My wife and I are working through our sex and drug addiction issues, and we are making progress in returning to intimacy. We've both been questioning what kind of resources we should read and or what kind of advice or concrete steps you've seen at work in keeping intimacy and healthy communication going when couples that have been separated move back in together.
Well, I hate to go back to a previous subject we've already mentioned, but some friends of mine wrote a book called Sexual Reintegration Therapy, and they followed it, I think, with a workbook and some things that couples can do. And as Tammy said, their name is Bill and Ginger Burkaw. I just did a podcast with them. I think it's called Restoring Sexuality After Betrayal, I think is what we called it. And they have workbooks, they have workshops. So I think, first of all, I admire both of you recovering together and your commitment to healing together there. I think that's one of the most powerful forces a couple can have is to go through this together and make it out the other side. So good for you for working on it, staying together. And I think it really does take some guidance and intervention to move in the direction you want to move. Um, if I'm a sex addict, I already have intimacy problems and relationship issues inside of me, and sex is a whole nother subject. So I think having professionals involved, or at least following a structure rather than let's just start this, will be much more helpful.
And the couples healing from betrayal work group that's going to start in January. I just put the link in there. But we actually are talking about healthy sexuality, communication, all of the basic fundamental tools that,
Forgiveness.
really will help. Yeah, that will help move a relationship forward. So I put the link. The group is available to sign up. It's a 6-week course, 90 minutes once a week. Online, easy. Consider that as well. So.
Well, I understand we have 21 guys in the sort of beginner educational workshop, right? Just
We
learning how to deal with
23,
this.
we had 2 join after, so now, yeah, so yeah, it's now 23.
One
Yes,
of the things that I really love about this world is that we can reach out to people all over. We have people from Japan or Israel who come and participate in these things because they can. And that is one of the wonderful things about this kind of medium. Yeah, I'm sorry. Was there a question
well,
there?
no, we were going to set one up. Well, we have one set up for January 4th, and we're getting enough people that are
Oh,
asking. So we're probably going to we were going to not do one in December, but we probably are. So watch for that. If we move in that direction, another work group to launch in December for men. There's a females work group that will begin in January with Lacey Bentley, who does the female
ooh.
addict groups on our site. And she's also participating with Dr. Robin in the rooms on Friday night once a month. She's guest hosting that
Ladies'
one.
night. Ladies'
Ladies'
night.
night, yeah, and not just for women, but a female in the leading the group at that time. So again, Tammy at seekingintegrity.com, but I'm putting things in the chat too.
And let me just say really quickly, there's a reason why we do this stuff. And, I've been running treatment programs for 25 years. And what I know, pardon me, about being in individual therapy, groups or 12-step, is that there's parts you just don't get. And the part you don't get is the educational piece. What does this mean? How does addiction work? How do I prevent relapse? How do I, and we're actually taking them through exercises to begin to grow themselves in that direction. And I don't think, if you're in therapy with me an hour a week, I'm not going to take an hour to give you a lecture and have you do homework. But I think that is equally as important as the therapy in the early stages of recovery. That's why we set it up.
Well, and I hear consistently from the guys that are joining that how helpful it is. And also, like if someone's talking about something, they might not have even thought of that, put it in the category as a problem or whatever, and somebody brings it up and they go, "Oh, I do that too," and it
Mm.
normalizes it as well. So I think it's education, but it's also the camaraderie of being in a group with other people that are on the same journey. So.
I wanted to say something about that too, Tammy, because I was here at the treatment center. I was here at Seeking Integrity today, and I was teaching the guys, and I was just doing what I consider to be a very basic lecture about what we call the cycle of addiction, because it does go round and round and round. And to me, honestly, it's just like, okay, I've done this for years. Here's the lecture. And I do it well, but it's still the same lecture I did 20 years ago. And I said, how was that for you guys? Oh my God, that was so profound. I see myself. So there's something about hearing things talked about and seeing them drawn on a board, and that is, it's not like someone seeing you directly. And I think there's more room to sit back and say, oh, that's me, and that's me, and that's me. So it is, you're right, Tammy, it's very helpful in that way.
Next question. How do I detach with love and compassion when I am so hurt and angry? I'm isolating from my loved one to not only protect myself, but also to not lash out at him.
So this is a tough one because we don't know how long their problem has been going on. But so I have a saying about you spouses. Your job in the first year of recovery is 3 things. 1, get yourself some support so you're not alone in all of this because it's so shameful and embarrassing. Number 2, be as angry as you need to be without being abusive or, hitting or calling names. But you get to be angry every single day, and you get to say, I'm really angry at you and I don't want to be close to you and you really hurt me, even if it's 6 months later. So I worry about this concept of wanting to move away from your pain because you're worried about it's going to get inflicted on. Look, We lied to you for years. We cheat on you for years. We tell you blue is red and red is blue, and no, we're not, and yes, we are. And you have a right to be pissed for a really long time. And I'll say something I say often, which I just think is a lovely thing. You know, what is the opposite of hate? And, you know, the opposite of hate is not love. The opposite of, sorry, I said that wrong. What is
Yeah.
the opposite of love? And the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. So if you are angry and pissed and hurt and you're still in your marriage, you're still in your relationship, it's when you kind of feel like, you know, I don't really want to work on this. I don't really want to focus. I think I can move on. That's when you really are ready to move on.
And read Prodependence and join our support groups free on
Free,
sexandrelationshiphealing.com. There's
free.
partner groups. We've added a new partner group too on Thursday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. Natalie from Canada is leading that one. So she had, I don't remember, 25 women the first, yeah, I know, for the first time. I was like, yay, so that's good.
Well,
So
what I want you guys to know is that when we first started this work, we thought about how can we create a community where people can come together in anonymous ways and confidential ways online to learn from one another and support each other without us charging them. And so we created sexandrelationshiphealing.com. We have 14 therapists or so every week who are volunteering their time to monitor and moderate these groups so you guys are safe, but they're doing so as volunteers. And really, it's all free. All 14 groups, all the lectures, all the webinar, all the podcasts, it is all free. And there's a reason from my heart about that. I know that not everyone's going to make therapy. I know that not everyone is ever going to walk through the doors of a 12-step program. I know how few of you will make it here to Seeking Integrity, but you can go online and join these groups and go to the podcast and get education and grow, even if you never make it through the door of a therapist's office. And that's what we wanted to give you, was a leg up on things that we thought most people don't get, and it's free.
So somebody, I'm going to read this out loud. We love you guys for that. Lots of exclamation points. It is the most helpful thing that has happened in my life. Thank you for validating that. Okay,
So
next
sweet.
question. This one's complicated. Wife and I planning a chat tonight. D-Day 17 months ago, multiple affairs of various sorts, 15-year relationship, 2 small kiddos. Forced codependent therapeutic models have left me bereft and her exasperated. Real divorce chat 3 days ago led her to one of your podcasts. Now she is reluctantly recognizing she has an addiction issue, bipolar diagnosed, in psychotherapy and on meds for many years. I'm 100% codependent. She is terrified from the realization of addiction. Any guidance on how to thread the needle of the conversation tonight? So,
well, I don't understand the 17 months. Have they been separated, or what does that mean, Tammy?
D-Day was 17 months ago.
So this person found out about everything.
Correct. Yes. But there was a 15-year relationship.
Right. But then what does it mean, chat tonight? Does that mean they're not living together, or?
He apparently is going, female addict,
right,
male partner. They're going to have a chat tonight about now what, because they had a very difficult conversation 3 days ago about possibly divorcing, and now they're going to talk tonight. So
well, I want to say something about relationships. Actually, I'm going to ask you to answer the question because I think it's a good one for you to answer, Tammy, but I want to say something about relationships. Finding people that we get along with is not easy. Finding someone you can live with is even harder. Finding someone you can go through something like COVID with, where you're just staring at each other for 3 months, is an amazing test of a marriage. I really recommend, unless there's real abuse, that you guys really give your relationships a chance. Part of the problem with codependency, in my opinion, is that it really drove a wedge in couples. It said to the partner, you need to detach and work on yourself. And if you don't work on yourself, you're going to either end up back with this person or picking. It just wasn't fair. And so about the chat tonight, Tammy, what are your thoughts?
Well, 2 things. First of all, and we use this often in the reverse where it's a male addict, female partner, but I think holding the line of like, I often in sharing with partners, they're like, what do I say? And I think it's fair to say, I love you, I care about you. I can see, how challenging this is for you, how broken you are. I want to help you get the help that you need. I can't just sit and stand by and watch you self-destruct. And I think that feels like it comes from a place of I care about you, but I'm also holding a boundary that I'm just not going to watch everything or be part of an implosion, as things are falling around. So, but for her as a female in recovery, and there's other people, that are on here that are sharing as well, it's so worth it. And, and yeah, it's scary anytime. I mean, you're trying to do things differently. It's scary, but, the alternative is losing you, losing the kiddos. I mean, like bad consequences. And for what? So I appreciate that she's on meds. That's a good thing. And hopefully, a gentle but firm conversation of, from a codependent standpoint is effective. So.
And for those of you who don't know codependence, I've had a longstanding challenge with codependency. I just don't think it exists. I think it's a very sort of mean, judgmental way of telling mostly women that there's something wrong with the way they love. And so I wrote a book called Prodependence, which is really sort of taking off with this concept that there's nothing wrong with you for loving the person you love. And if they're broken, nothing wrong with love. And there's nothing wrong with you because you picked someone who fell apart. It happens. If they had cancer, no one would say it was your fault. So if they have an addiction, why is it your fault? So I wanted to fight back against that. And I think I've done a pretty good job. I want to say one more thing, two more things. One is about intimacy. Big question. What is it? Is it about sex? Is it about this? I tell you exactly what intimacy is. Write this down. Intimacy is the process of letting yourself become known by another person. The fact that your spouse admitted she was an addict, that she was willing to come forth and be honest with you about it, that means she was being intimate with you. Intimacy is telling my truth and risking that you're going to hate it, you're going to leave me. I'm taking, or even if it's stuff, especially if it's stuff I know you're not going to want to hear. So as long as it's not said in a manipulative way or trying to seduce, but really just, hey, this is who I am. I've been hiding it. I want you to know. That person is making an attempt to be closer to you. You may not want to accept that right now, but that is the honest truth. I'll stop there. Intimacy is enough. We'll skip the other one.
Well, and if she needs professional help, Tammy at seekingintegrity.com. I'm going to be real honest. It's more challenging to find good help for women because we don't offer it yet.
Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, but I will do my best to help you find, qualified resources. So
I was going to add one thing, which is, and I'm sure you relate to this, Tammy, it's much harder and I'm not asking you to have empathy for what's happened to you, but it is so much harder for a woman to come forward and talk about addiction, period, no less sexual behavior, because you have to understand if a man has a lot of sex, even if it's sleazy, we're still studs. We're still like, we get what we want, but a woman, she's a slut. And that is the cultural pain that women carry around in their struggles, especially in this arena. So I do think it's more difficult for women to find help. I also think it's more difficult for a woman to own that she has these kind of problems, because what does she think it means about her? As opposed to having a problem, she's a bad, she's not a good woman.
Next question. I'm a recovering sex addict, 6 months sober, and I'm wondering if I cannot remember any sexual abuse as a child, but feel like it could have happened. Is this a common thing? Since I hear so often in meetings that sex abuse early on attributes to addiction, but I can only recall certain minor things growing up. I had a physical abuse with parents, but since I am the only sibling out of 4 with an addiction, I'm confused. Is it possible for all 3 siblings to have suppressed the past except for me?
Well, first of all, I think that it is a error, or I want to say a misnomer, but that's a big word. Not that you guys can't handle big words, but I think it's a mistaken belief that sexual abuse leads to these problems. It is true that early neglect, early enmeshment with a parent, violence, parents, there's alcoholism. Sex addiction doesn't evolve necessarily out of any kind of sexual abuse. It more evolves out of a child's desperate need to soothe and comfort themselves in the absence of caregivers who can soothe and comfort them. And little kids touch themselves and it feels good, and they rub themselves on beds and stuff. So it's not atypical for a kid who's really like young kid, 4, 5, 6 years old, to try to use fantasy and feeling good to just try to avoid all that stuff that's going on over there. And they learn that fantasy is a way to escape. So it really isn't about necessarily, in fact, I would say maybe a third of the people here at Psychic Integrity, maybe the third of all the men I've worked with, have overt sexual abuse. What I find much more often is what we talk about as maternal enmeshment or paternal enmeshment, which means the only source of my feeling valued and worthwhile is when I was doing things for my parent or pleasing my parent. But the fact that I just exist on my own and I deserve love and attention just because I'm a little kid, a lot of us didn't get that. We had to perform in order to get that. And that leaves lasting scars that have nothing to do with sexual abuse, but they can lead to sex addiction.
Well,
And
and
by
I
the way,
think
Tammy, I'm sorry, sorry, I didn't interrupt you, but I did. That person said something in their email in there, and I wanted to say, I don't know if I have it in front of me still.
about I'm the only sibling out of 4. So is it possible the other 3?
Well,
Which
there is
piece?
something about, look, not everyone ends up, addiction is a lot about the circumstances and the nurture part, but it also has something to do with the nature part. You know, some of us are more anxious than others. Some of us are more depressive than others. Siblings can have completely different personalities. So other siblings' reactions to what they went through and you went through could be completely different. They may have problems with relationships. They may struggle with things you don't know about. But no one leaves those experiences unscathed. There may be a reason in terms of the lineup where you
Yes.
first or last, or
Yep.
that you got a punch that others didn't get, or maybe you're just genetically a little more vulnerable, a little more, I tend to be depressive and anxious, and I think I was born like that. So everything that piled on top of it made a mess.
Well,
Hey,
I was
Tam, I
thinking
gotta
the
tell you
same
something.
thing. Go ahead.
Oh, you were going to say something and I interrupted you.
I
Go
was going
ahead.
to say about the lineup, because I was thinking the lineup, and are your siblings the same sex as you? Are they, is the, because sometimes there's a big age difference between the siblings. I mean, there's so many factors. But yes, the neglect, abandonment, there's often something, but it doesn't have to be the overt sexual abuse. But what were you going to say?
I was going to ask you if you'd see my sweatshirt. See, it's all Mickey Mouse,
Oh,
and
cute.
you see that? I
Oh,
didn't
that's
want you to
so
think I was just
cute.
wearing a black
And goofy.
sweatshirt.
And no,
Yeah, yeah.
no,
Well,
that's so
we
cute.
grew up with these guys.
Yes,
So,
we did. Yes, I
okay,
actually
sorry.
did.
I just needed a
Okay,
moment of,
this is a great question. How long should a spouse of a sex addict see a CSAT?
You want to start?
I do, because so until you see a noticeable difference and they're on a solid recovery path. And that would be, in my opinion, a longer time. It takes, I think, my experience is it's going to take probably a couple of years for someone to get a solid foundation, going 50 minutes to a therapist every week. And hopefully they're also going to group therapy with that CSAT as well. So then, but you're going to start seeing a difference. And now we say the same thing about going to, 12-step meetings. And, it's like you go until you want to go, so you have to go. And then you go, oh my gosh, this is so good for me. This is so much better. I'm feeling different. But often, like the earlier person was talking about, it's like, oh, I've gone for 6 months. I'm done. No. So thoughts, Dr. Rob?
Well, I wasn't sure, Tammy, if you were, maybe I got the question wrong. It was about how long should the spouse see a CSAT, not
Oh,
the
I see
addict.
what you're saying.
And
Oh, see,
so,
yeah. Thank you for
so
clarifying that.
no, I make mistakes. I do this all the time. And that's a good answer to a different question. Um,
Yes.
so I think the CSAT, the trained therapist in addiction, is really important in the beginning because they're going to help you set boundaries that you may not have thought about. They're going to help you get ready for disclosure. Hopefully, they're going to take you through disclosure. But I don't think past 6 or 8 months that it's really a requirement for a partner. Like, you have certain tasks and work to get through. And then, I don't think that you need a CSAT. Really, partners are not dealing with their own addiction. They're dealing with grief and lack of support and aloneness and being betrayed. And you don't need an addiction therapist for that. Someone who's nurturing and kind and supportive is just as meaningful. It's just the things you have to do with the addict, like getting through disclosure and setting boundaries about wanting to kill each other. And, those early things I think a CSAT is best for. Does that
I
make sense?
think, well, I think a CSAT, unfortunately, I'm gonna say this on camera. Unfortunately, some of the CSAT still use the codependent model, and unfortunately, I still hear that. So honestly, I would be more in the camp for a spouse if it's a CSAT who understands codependence, betrayal, trauma, great. Otherwise, I think working with someone who understands trauma and betrayal trauma, even if they're not CSAT trained, you probably would have a better experience. So, okay. So next question. My husband is SA. I've been seeing a CSAT therapist. She told me that I will have a lifelong recovery working on myself. Is this normal? So wait, so this is for a partner, uh, or is this part of the codependence model? Clearly, I'm not perfect and have a lot to work on, but the verbiage lifelong recovery sort of threw me for a loop. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like codependency. And codependency is about you contributed to the addiction, you're part of the problem, and you have to work through your own stuff so that you don't keep contributing to it or making it happen. And that's a theory I think that's pretty much going by the wayside. I think we're beginning to understand, and this is why I wrote Codependence, that you're just doing the best job you can to love the person you have in your life, and you end up hurting and going through trauma. And you don't need an addiction person for that. You don't have an addiction. You're not addicted to your spouse. No one's addicted to another person. You might be very obsessed with their behavior or their problem, but listen, if they had cancer, you'd be obsessed with that too. So I don't really think that the addiction route, or even thinking of yourself as having the kind of repetitive dysfunction that addicts have, is what partners are dealing with. And I think for far too long, we have looked at partners that way, and it's only served to hurt them more than help them.
And I used to struggle every time somebody said recovery for a partner, and then somebody said, well, if you think of it like healing, and I could kind of get on board with it, but I agree with Dr. Rob. It's like you deserve support because this is traumatic. You deserve to have other people that understand, and without finger pointing and being blamed for any of that. If you choose to continue to work on yourself because you want to be more enlightened and all that, fantastic. But in the moment, it's about dealing with what's in front of you, which is the betrayal trauma. Okay,
Yeah, there's
next
one more
go ahead.
thing
Sure.
about that, Ted. I'm sorry. The way I look at you partners is that you're in crisis. And this is what I wrote Codependence about. Rather than saying there's something wrong with you that drove the addiction, in other words, you are fostering the addiction, I look at it the other way, like the addiction happened to you and it shoved you into a crisis, which is not something that most people can, not the kind of crisis most people can get through on their own. And unfortunately, in the past, we would look at you partners and say, well, what's wrong with you for being this person? What's wrong with you for staying with this person? And I think what's wrong with staying the person what is wrong with staying with a person you love, even if they're broken? So that whole concept that there must be something wrong with me for wanting to stay with someone I love who's broken, I think is just a false narrative.
Next question. D-Day was in March. My husband went to inpatient treatment in June. We've been married for 19 years, and I had no idea his sex addiction included almost everything: porn, emotional and non-emotional affairs, paid and non-paid sex, etc. He is doing really well in sobriety, no slips, etc. I am struggling to understand how he was just able to, like, he's just now able to stop, but he says he could not do it for 20 years. Why can he do it now?
Well, as a recovering person yourself, who probably never thought they could stop doing a particular thing and then did, I think that you can speak to that.
I can. And it was part of the terrified that I mentioned earlier. I went off to treatment and I was terrified that it wouldn't work for me. And I was terrified that it would because I couldn't even imagine. So it sounds like your husband got in treatment the tools that he needed to be able to deal with life on life's terms. And he didn't have those before. So it isn't, we talk about it all the time when people come to Seeking Integrity. We don't magically fix them in 14 days. We give them tools and a plan to be able to continue the journey. So I can completely understand how you're feeling like he just stopped. Well, he didn't just stop, and it will be an ongoing process. My recovery journey is a lifelong journey, and I hope he's continuing to do what he needs to do, what the recommended aftercare was, so that he can continue on that journey. And it's pretty new for you yet, but hopefully you start seeing that he is changing, not just with the not acting out, but in all areas of his life. He'll be like more intimate on all levels, as Dr. Rob was explaining it. So thoughts, Dr. Rob?
No, I think we should move on. You did a great job.
Okay. How much sobriety for SA is recommended before a couple should go through disclosure? Or how can I tell if he's truly in recovery? Those are two completely different questions. So,
I don't think sobriety is required for disclosure, but on the other hand, no, I do. I'm sorry, that's not correct. I don't think someone can do disclosure if they're still acting out because the list never ends. And so they have to have a period where they've stopped. And also, they've stopped looking at you as being the problem. Because as addicts, it's like, oh, well, they're too fat, they're too this, they're too that. Like I said, I'm entitled to go over here. So they have to, I think, really have taken responsibility as much as they can for the problem being their problem, and then they have to really have some time away from the problem. But listen, this is what I used to say when a client came in. You have 6 weeks to do disclosure. In that 6 weeks, here's all the things you have to do. And by the way, I'd say to the spouse, 6 weeks to a month, 2 months is about right, because we don't always remember everything we've done or when we did it. Or so having someone like a sponsor or therapist do a history and helps us get more ready to do what we have to do with you. Here's another part of that question I wanted to
how
answer.
can I tell if he's truly in recovery?
Oh, honey, none of us are truly perfectly in recovery. I mean, I think that, how do I say this? I'm a little actually worried about your spouse's recovery. How long has this been, Tammy?
They don't say so.
So nobody has perfect sobriety. I know that you partners don't want to hear this, but it's my job to be honest with you. We struggle all of our lives with this issue, all of our lives. And I have never met anyone ever in a 12-step program for sexual recovery who didn't have one or two slips. It didn't mean that they went back to their old behavior, but something. So what I'm a little concerned about is that maybe you're not getting the full truth, because I know that as an addict, I would much rather say to my spouse, I'm sober, I'm sober, I'm sober, I'm sober, rather than ever talk about the struggle. And that I don't mean that if I look at someone on the street sexually, or even if I flirt with someone, which is not okay, that I have to go running home to you and tell you. That's what my sponsor's for, that's what my therapist is for. But if I cross a real bottom line, I need to let you know. Otherwise, no trust can be restored. Imagine you're coming to me and saying, oh, you have a year of recovery. I'm so happy for you. I'm going to those meetings. And well, I actually have 3 months. I mean, what a nightmare for the spouse. So, by the way, our being honest with you about our struggle is intimate. It's our opening up to you and letting you know who we are, even though we know you're not going to like it.
Yeah. And I was like, what do you know about his 3 circle plan? What do you know about his recovery plan? I mean, like, that's how you kind of know where he's at with it, is what has he been transparent with? So,
And as long as we're on this, I was saying this to the guys, I was seeing them today here at the treatment center, that a lot of spouses say to us, and I'll say this colloquially, he or she's been in recovery for 6 months, but they're still an asshole. And so I don't think you can necessarily tell a change in someone's behavior by their becoming kinder, warmer, and sweeter, because becoming a better person takes time. Stopping the behavior can take a relatively short period of time with the right pieces in place. So I'm not sure, as much as you would want to, that you can base their recovery on they seem nicer, they're more involved with the family, they're more engaged. That would be good, and one would hope that will happen, but that doesn't necessarily mean sobriety. Yeah, I mean, you cannot tell. It's not something you can sense in that way. Some of us are very good liars, but I probably would have a discussion with my partner saying, look, I know you keep telling me sober, 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 not slipping, but you can't be perfect. So tell me once in a while you're struggling. Tell me, I don't feel like I'm getting your full truth. And I don't need to hear every little thing you struggle with, but I do need to hear that it's not easy, that it's a journey. Look, all of us addicts want to tell you, oh, got this lit, piece of cake, never going to happen again. It just doesn't work that way. So I'm not saying that all of your partners are going to slip. I'm not saying that they're going to go back to their old behavior. But if they do, they need to tell you. And that's more important than, on some level, than they're having 3 months or 6.
we are out of time, and I'm sorry to
Oh,
those of you. Yeah, well, I mean, do you?
no, tonight went fast.
Yes, it
No,
did
we have
go
to have good
fast.
boundaries. We need good
Yes, we
boundaries. It
do. I
was,
was going to say, I think we need to hold the boundaries because there's several, and I don't want to. Yeah, anyway, so thank you to all of you who came. So,
and on Friday on intherooms.com, I'll be doing this at 6 p.m. California or Pacific time, answering questions for an hour. And that's an addiction environment of recovery. I usually get 170, 180 people. But just listening to what those people's questions about, what they have to say, what they're looking for, I think even if you don't get a question answered, is a different experience than sitting here. So you're always welcome, and it's free. Tammy, thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm trying to type one. So there's somebody you wrote to us. Feel free to email me. I'd be happy to elaborate. I just zipped a very poorly typed message off. So join us again next week. Grateful you're here. Great to see you, Dr. Rob. Take care,
Be kind to
everybody.
yourselves. Be kind to
Bye-bye.
yourself.